Either way, we're back on the van. I'm working on the heat. We've actually had a very strange 60-degree day here in December. I didn't think I'd get to any of this until next year because it's winter here. But since we've got a mid-50s, almost 60-degree day, I'm able to work in the van. Let me show you what I'm working on. Here is the heater hose that I have that I'm going to use to run coolant to the front, to the heat exchanger. And I'm just started to thread it here. So you can see I've run it down here. And then it goes over top of the bracket here, and then it goes near the steering column there, and then exits underneath. We'll go underneath, I'll show you some of that. And it's gonna follow along between my water tank and the fuel cell all the way to the back. This is the heater hose here, not the silver one, but right above it. And you can see it goes back up into the engine compartment into here. And here we're gonna follow it along back next to the fuel tank. Between that and the freshwater tank we have here, this should give it some nice protection all the way back, and then again near the frame once we get back to the back there. Then I'm going to mount the heat exchanger here. You can see those couple of little studs there. I'm going to make a bracket and mount them straight onto there. Here's what I built for the mount and the connectors here for the heat exchanger. The larger size here, the 3/4 inch, are what came with the Rixen and what connect to the hoses going to the back. The stock heater hoses are 5/8, so you need a little different fitting for it. And I'm going to use a straight here because the stock hose should go right on it. And then I bought an elbowed hose to go back in there. I'll show you when it's in the van how we're going to mount that. With these two holes, there's some studs on the back wall. That's what I'm going to mount it to. And there's this roughed into place. I still have to put actual mounting bolts on it, but I'm gonna hook up the hoses first while it's off. I think it'll be easier to do that and then push it into place and mount it from there. And then we will mount the fittings to connect to the stock system. Here's where I'm gonna mount this and the connections I'm gonna make. That's the stock heater box there. That's the back side of it there. And I'm gonna pull the left-hand hose off, use that for the attachment onto the straight. I believe that because of how long this hose is, it's flexible enough, I don't think I'll have to do anything to cut it. I think I'll just be able to mount it straight there. And then I'll add another hose then to that side to connect then to this side here. I've clamped that off just with a clamp, so that way it shouldn't leak hopefully as much coolant. I'm going to try to pull that off and stick the other one on as fast as I can, hopefully again not to lose too much coolant. This is a high point here, and so I don't know whether or not this has got air gap up this high or whether it's full. Here's the other hose that I have. I'm going to do the same thing with this one. I'm going to clamp it off. I'm going to clamp it off, that way hopefully I can pull this one and get it on before it leaks too much coolant out of there. First, I'm going to pull the hose clamp that's in there and see if any leaks out once I pull that hose. Okay, so far, no leaks. Hopefully this hose only been on here a year won't be so adhered to that it's hard to get off. That is on there pretty good. I'm gonna have to get something to pry that off a little bit, get a little hook to get in there and get that to break loose some. So I'll get that started and then I'll be right back. So I've worked around the back of it just a little bit with the little small pick and got the edges moving a little bit. I've got some movement on it, so I think I'll be able to pull this off now. When I pull this off, like I said, I'm gonna stick the other one on, hopefully lose just very little coolant. I'm sure some's gonna come out, but try to lose as little as possible. So I've got this one ready. Got some rags in case, and we're gonna pull this one off. Alrighty, okay. There's that one off, and get the other one on. Come on, baby. Get on there. And it does leak a little coolant, but it's actually just dripping. It's not a lot. So it spilled out some when I first pulled it, but after that it just started dripping. So it was not a lot. Okay, there's that one on. Okay, whew. Actually wasn't too bad. Probably lost a cup even of coolant or antifreeze. So not bad. Okay, there is that. One done. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all the hoses onto here before I actually put it in place. I'm going to get it kind of roughed in up there but not tightened down until after I get all the hoses in. It's going to be easier to be able to get to the hoses and put the clamps on from further away than it will be if it was all in there in place. I'm going to start with the two uppers here because they're bigger, and I'm going to get clamps for those. Spring clamps for those. And the way this tool works, if you haven't seen one of these, it actually has a little ratchet on it so you can actually clamp it in place, and then it will stop at that level so you can slip the spring over, pull the trigger or pull the lever here, and it comes back open. The Ford ones have a little notch in them, so when you open them they stay open until you push it, you know, tweak it back to where it shuts. These do not. I used a reinforced and then also insulated hose so that way it would fit on there just a little bit better. You have a little more protection underneath the van, which makes a really pretty stiff hose. Now this is the stock hose for the heater core. So that fitting is actually the wrong size. It is 3/4. So I'm going to put that on there, and then we can get the stock hose on. Okay, I've changed that fitting over to a 3/4 inch fitting, and it fits the stock heater hose. But the strange part is that I was fairly confident those heater hoses were 5/8 of an inch. The 5/8 inch hose that I ordered, the silicone hose, fits over the fitting going into the heater core just fine. So it's 5/8 inch. But this one either has just been stretched because it was over that fitting or what, I don't know. But it fits over the 3/4 nicely. So I had to change that fitting to a 3/4. The other one obviously is still 5/8 because that's the silicone hose that I bought. Now I'm going to tighten up all the clamps, put that back together, and then tighten the heat exchanger down to the firewall and secure the hose a little bit better, and we'll show you what it looks like. So I've got all the clamps tightened in place. It looks good. I'm going to clean up all the tools here. We'll start it up, make sure we don't have any leaks, at least on the engine side. I don't have any glycol in the Rixen side of it, so in the heat for the back, so I can't test that, but I can test out to make sure I don't have any leaks in the system or the engine side of it. And here's how it turned out in the engine compartment. This is the stock hose going to the heater core. It is pulled forward. You can see it fits just fine. This is the new hose that I put in. Again, this was 3/4 inches. This is 5/8 inch. It fit over the fitting just fine. If it were too small, I wouldn't be able to push it on, but it went over just fine, clamped in place nicely. And these obviously are the hoses then that run back to the heat exchanger and the furnace and so forth, the glycol tank in the back. You can see then the 5/8 inch hose here that I put on runs right back to the heat exchanger, makes a nice little connection. So this is nice and tidy. You can see where it's mounted then to the 2 screws on the firewall there. It is stable. I mean, you have some movement to it, but it is really stable. So I think it worked out just fine. All right, just had a chance to warm up now. Still have it running. And the heater hose is here, is, you know, getting warm, obviously. Heat exchanger here is getting warm. And thankfully, no drips anywhere in there. Wonderful. Okay. Okay, the last thing I did then here is kind of put the hoses in just a little bit better. Now this is obviously the windshield wiper, okay, the motor here. And as this works, the back of that, it spins all the way around 360 degrees, which pulls this one here back and forth, which is connected to this one. So you have to make sure then that you get these hoses back far enough. There we go, back far enough. What I did is there's another stud sticking off basically where this tie is here, and I put a clamp on there and then zip tied it back. I zip tied each one of these individually and then zip tied them together, so that should hold them back fine. It actually misses by quite a bit, so even if they were forward, I think it would still probably miss, but this way it'll miss for sure. Now we're all buttoned up in here, and again, I ran the van again for quite a while to heat it up. As this got hot and pressurized, still no leaks, so we're doing good. The next step in the install is the electrical portion of this. Now obviously we run some of the wires that were underneath the van, the ones that go to the fuel pump, the ones that go to the heater itself. Those were wired underneath the van and then brought up through the van here through the floor. But now we got to wire them for the control box. There's a control box obviously that mounts on the inside, and I've mounted it here in the back. It has enough wire on some of this wire loom. You probably could mount it up towards the front there, closer to the other electrical components, but I kind of like them all here together, so that way if I need to troubleshoot anything on the heat system, it's all right here together. Because then of the power requirements, I ran a 10 gauge wire from the front back all the way back to here. This wire then I can hook to a 100 amp fuse off of the Lynx distributor and run its own little leg back here, and that's enough then to power everything we need for the box here for the Rixen and so forth. What I'm doing now is I'm just mounting the box. I mounted it underneath here again, so it's all tidy there together. I'll give you a little close-up picture and show you what lines are coming through here next. And here's the wiring harness from the Rixen. I ran it up through the floor right through there, and then it comes up here. Now these are long enough that they probably could run quite a bit forward again if you want to run it closer to your batteries. Now I would cut these down normally, except for it appears that they have some resistors in here. It has a spot here that says do not bend. This is the diagnostic port. Same thing here on this one here that goes to the control box itself. It says do not bend. Now realistically, I probably could cut the wire in the middle and splice it and leave the resistor in there, but just wrapping it up that way a little bit, it'll be just fine. It works nicely because it's right here next to the control box. And then you can see here, this is positive and negative coming from the house battery. This, it says here, needs to go to the engine harness battery. And then these obviously here are where you hook up all the other wires for the fan, for the fuel pump, and the water pump itself. All the directions are laid out pretty nicely here, and you can see how they're all set up. Now, time to fill the system. To fill it, I'm going to use this Low-Tox, the Prestone Low-Tox, which I believe is the exact same thing as the Sierra, the Peak Sierra now. I'm not sure how easy it is to find the Prestone version of this anymore. That's just what we happen to have here locally. This is still the polyethylene glycol antifreeze, and that's what we want to use instead of an ethylene glycol or a standard antifreeze. The reason is toxicity, in particular because the tank is inside, the hoses are inside. If they were to leak onto the floor, that would then get, or if we use regular antifreeze, if it went into the passenger compartment, we were not there in the back of the van, and the dog were there, she would definitely lick it up, and then that's toxic to them. This is less toxic. It's not toxic. You can't just drink it, okay? But polyethylene glycol is found in cosmetics. It's found in, foods even, and it is used as medication. So not that you could take this bottle and drink it, but it is definitely safer than it would be to use ethylene glycol. This doesn't transfer heat as well as ethylene glycol. Now it does give you freeze protection. According to the bottle here, at 50-50, it's negative 26 degrees. At 67-33, it's 76 degrees. We don't quite need 76, but 76 below zero, that is in Fahrenheit. We don't need quite that degree of freeze protection, so I'm going to mix it at 60-40, which should give me about negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit freeze protection, which is fine. Boiling point wise, it gives you at 50-50, 259 degrees Fahrenheit with a 15-pound radiator cap. So 266 at the 67-33 mark. So again, at 60-40, it should be around 250 degrees of boiling protection, which again should be plenty. So that should give me plenty of freeze protection, plenty of boiling protection. Now the heat transfer isn't as good, so we'll see if it's as efficient. Again, we don't drive this where it's freezing winter weather to where we need so much heat that we're battling sub-zero temperatures. It's just not what we use the van for. So I think the heat will be fine, just even at a modest level of heat transfer compared to the extra heat transfer. realistically, water is going to give you your best heat transfer. The fact that it's going to be 40% water, the water will still transfer heat just fine. So I think even though it might not be perfectly as efficient, it should be good. Here's where the tank is. I have it underneath this shelf. This will eventually be enclosed by the shower, but right now I still have access to it from the front here. So I'm going to mix in then 40% of this, mix in the water to get the 64 out of that part, and then start mixing water into here so we've got the exact right amount. We've got heat now, the furnace. It took a few times on and off for it to prime the fuel pump. Finally the fuel pump started going, and now it's running, burning gas and putting out heat. You can hear it running. Fuel pump clicks, and it burns some fuel. Here's the air exchanger. It does obviously make some noise, but I mean, it is putting out nice and warm air in here. This will heat up the cabin in here. This is not a huge space. This will heat up the cabin easily. Probably a fairly quick time with the furnace on. So now here you can see the coolant flowing. So this is, when the pump was turned down, you couldn't see much flow in there. Now you can see that it's actually flowing in there. That's what made the difference in the inlet and outlet temperature, because it's circulating the water well enough. So that was an important detail that I didn't have right that solved our problems with getting this to run better. I'll show you on the pump where the switch is. So if we look down here, there's the pump itself. On the bottom, very bottom of the pump here, you're not gonna be able to see the switch, but on the bottom of the pump there's a dial. And that dial, turning it counterclockwise, looking at it this way, turns it up. You hit a detent in the middle, turn it further, and that puts it all the way to full. That was the key to getting this to work well. Closing up the Rixen install. This has been one of the more complicated parts of the install that we've had. It took a lot of different moving parts, a lot of different steps, because you have to put things to the heater and the heat exchange on the engine block. You have to put the furnace in, get it plumbed in, wired up. There's wiring then for the electrical connections for the 120 part of the heater, obviously the expansion tank, all that. There's a lot to do. You'll see in the video. It's such a long process. This actually might be 2 or 3 videos. Depends on how Christine divides it up as far as the install goes. But it definitely is one of the more complicated parts that we've done. So it's working very well, heats the cabin up. We haven't tried the hot water yet because we don't have any water in the tank just because it's freezing here. But once we get water in there, we'll test that part of it out. Again, that should be the simplest part of it because it's just water running through heat exchanger. But I'm excited that we have heat. It is another big step forward for the van, and we'll keep moving.